Hey guys, it's Matt here, and today I'm doing another episode of Matt Rants. So, before we go on to the whole Matt Rants thing, just want to do a little brief, just talk about stuff that happened over the weekend, just something small, just before we kind of jump into the Matt Rants topic of the day. So, what I wanted to mention is that you guys might have noticed if you're, subscribed to the channel, which by the way, if you're not, totally do that. But if you're subscribed to the channel, been looking at the channel, notice that this weekend was a little light on releases. Just like last month when I mentioned that I think it was like 2 weekends in a row, I ended up having debate tournaments where I do work a local debate league behind the scenes. So doing that is very stressful, at least for those 2 days. So I try to have releases beforehand. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. So this weekend was one of those can'ts, but there's another one coming up this weekend. So I should have some releases for this weekend, even though, again, another tournament's coming up. So that's happening this weekend. Also on Friday, I'm going to a band's EP release called At the Ready. They're a local New York band, so definitely check them out online. And you can even buy their EP, I think, on Friday or starting on Friday. So I'll have more info about that as the weeks go on, but might mention them in like next week's Matt Rant, something like that. But I'm pretty sure you can buy their EP on Friday, this upcoming Friday. And what's really cool is that it's actually a physical release, which I love, because it's like, hey, as as we're all retro gaming fans, looking at cartridges going, we love you. It's nice to have a physical CD release. And I don't know, it's funny because this one is recently pressed, so it's like, hey, we can wait another 30 years for disc rot. So disc rot will not come in the next few years for those, at least. But anyway, so that's the sad stuff. Putting sad stuff aside, talking about releases today, we're talking about what is a Majesco release. Or what is a Majesco re-release? What does this mean, right? And today we're not talking about it in the Super Genesis sense, or Super Genesis, oh god, wow, that just happened. In the Sega Genesis sense, we're talking about it in regards to Super Nintendo games. So what is Majesco? What's that all about? What does that even mean? To some of you guys who are collectors out there, does that mean that your collections mean more in terms of value? Are they worthless? What does all this mean? Right. Well, first of all, I want to mention that Majesco is a Mexican-based company, so a company based in Mexico that dealt with re-releases of, I would say, popular Super Nintendo titles, because of the fact that you'd imagine they're getting re-released because they sold out and there's a demand for more. But they were definitely budget titles for the Super Nintendo. So they would work with third-party companies. Yes, they would technically have Nintendo's approval in the sense that if you opened up the cartridge, you would see Nintendo boards there, but they weren't working with official first-party Nintendo games. So you wouldn't see something like Super Mario World having a Majesco re-release, but you would see something like Mega Man X, Super Empire Strikes Back, Porky Pig's Haunted Holiday, some sports titles as well, many of those having Majesco re-releases. Now, why do I know those off the top of my head? Not just because I looked at the list that I'm posting in the description box below if you want to see if your game is potentially a Majesco re-release, or if you're on the lookout for games that are Majesco re-releases. It's because I actually have those, and I've had those ever since I was a kid, and I never knew what they were. I never knew much about them because, of course, when you're 5, 7, 8 years old, you're not really sitting back going, Mom, I really need to inspect this, because especially with the internet being, I say in its infancy only compared to what it is now, and of course me being in my infancy, being 5 to 8, I know not an infant, but in compared to what we know now, I think, and the knowledge that we can get now, it's a bit hard to be like, let me inspect and let me make sure, does it say made in Mexico or assembled in Mexico, because that matters, Mom. Like, no one, or Dad, no one was doing that, right? So at least I wasn't, and I think many of us around our age weren't. So so I had those bought for me, right, when I was a kid. And I noticed recently, going through some of my manuals, that many of them are in black and white. And I was very confused, because I was like, wait, why are these in black and white? I thought maybe, my dad or my mom maybe rented some games from like a Blockbuster, Hollywood Video, something like that. And back in the day, manuals, at least with the NES manuals, there was this whole copyright debacle with, should these things be allowed to be photocopied, because obviously, people would take them home anyway and not bring them back. So it was the idea of, and of course back in the day, these games, a lot of them had either game breaking if you didn't have the manual, or at least just helpful hints, like just teaching you how to play the game was done through a manual, not done through. It was done. There were tutorial levels. Yes, I'm not gonna say that there weren't tutorial levels in some cases, but more often than not, you had to learn what was going on, not just while the controls wise, but also the story of the world through the manual. So there's a lot of copyright issues with that. So I thought maybe because my manuals were grayscaled and not in color, some of them, not all of them, but some of them were, I thought, oh, maybe we swiped them from a Blockbuster or something like that. But that actually wasn't the case. So in doing some research on this, here are a few ways that you can tell whether or not your your Super Nintendo cartridge and Super Nintendo box and manual, whether or not they are Majesco re-releases. And then I'll talk to you guys about whether or not they actually matter in the grand scheme of things, really. So first of all, let's talk about the fact that the cartridges, so there are some cartridges, by the way, if you see Mexico anywhere on your cartridge, that does actually not mean that it is a Majesco re-release. So if you see, many of you see like a Made in Japan on the cartridge or on the box or on the manual, so you see Made in Japan, you're good. If you see Made in Mexico, you're also good. It's when you see assembled that you're like, especially if you're paying top dollar, and I mean top dollar, like hundreds and hundreds of dollars trying to get them sealed, and you want an official, like the first release rather than a second printing, that when you see it assembled in Mexico, that's when you say, no bueno. So that's when things might get a little no bueno depending on how high you're paying for this, right? How much money you're paying to try and get one of these releases. So that's the first thing, right? To say it's assembled in Mexico or made in Mexico. The next thing is some people will talk about the quality of the box, the quality of the manual, and the quality of the cartridge stickers, right? So sticker on the front and the sticker on the back. So front label, back label. Now, the problem with that though, in my opinion, is that if you the idea of, oh, the quality is worse, well, you'd have to have a real one in front of you, and most likely if you have a real one, I'm sorry, I say real as in a first printing, right? Because the second printings, Majesco re-releases, they are real. Let's clarify, they are real. But people always talk about like comparing with sticker quality, usually with repro. That's why my mind went to that word. But the point is that if you have a first printing in front of you and you go, oh no, let me have to compare it to a Majesco re-release printing, unless your box or sticker or something is so beat up that you're trying to get rid of it. And if it's so beat up, then, if it's sun damaged, let's say, right, and you're trying to replace it, then you can't compare the colors. And some people try to compare the colors online, but very hard to do that with people's different cameras, different camera quality, especially if you're buying this off of eBay. If you're trying to look at, Google Images or some other kind of images search engine, then you're probably looking at highly scanned HQ images that may have even been touched up. So looking at some of the releases the reviews that I've done on this channel, trying to find different, and will be doing, trying to find different pictures for things. Sometimes I'll see two different, same box art, and everything for a certain game, but one will have completely different colors. I assume the way the person scanned it in and maybe even, tried to make them pop more. So I have to sit there and go, wait, which is the actual box art? Right? And if it's a game that I have in English, of course I can tell. But if it's a game that I'm looking for the, Japanese box art for, I then have to sit back and go, wait, which one is actually more quote unquote real? And so that becomes a bit of a problem when you're trying to compare the colors and things like that. So, and say like, oh, this is lesser quality. So when I look at things like the reasons why these second printings are different than their first printings, I usually don't take things like quality, quote unquote, into account. Because again, it's subjective. It really depends on what you're looking at and where you're looking. So when I, tend to do is I tend to look at the assembled in Mexico, either on the box, on the cartridge sticker on the front. Also, you will notice that the sticker on the back end is a different color, I believe. So I'm pretty sure that the standard color is actually gray, just like the cartridge itself, where it might look a bit more yellow for the Majesco re-releases. Now, another thing I want to mention as well is, let's say someone ripped off the label on the cartridge, replaced it with a new one. Maybe theirs was sun faded really bad, spilled something on it, but the game worked. So they removed the cartridge label, they put a new one on there. It doesn't say made in or assembled in Mexico. It says made in Mexico or made in Japan. How do you know whether or not it's the second printing or the first printing, Majesco re-release or not? So what you do is you open up the cartridge and you actually look and see if Majesco is anywhere written on the board, because while Nintendo will still be on the board, Majesco will also be there as well. And that's definitely a great way to notice, oh snap, this is a Majesco re-release. Now, I mentioned earlier to you guys the difference between manuals, and that is a big deal, but the problem, of course, is buying these games online, you could end up getting a situation where the box is a made in Japan, made in Mexico, whatever it might be. The actual cartridge is just the manual is just fine too. The manual is in color, so you're sitting there, you're going, oh, the box is legit, the manual is legit, and then maybe you skim over the cartridge because you're like, oh, well, it doesn't look like a terrible label. It's the same, there's the right screws are in there, so you think you're just fine. You realize that you ended up getting a Majesco re-release because online you're going to have people, and by the way, this is something that I have no problem with personally, but again, some of you guys who are a bit more strict collectors might not, or new to collecting as well, might not cross your mind that people online are trying to put these together unless they're sealed, which I'm not saying to collect sealed because that's a lot of money to drop, but and I'm talking about like factory sealed, not these terrible resealings. So you actually have people end up taking a box from one source, a manual from one source, and a game from another, so they could be combining original releases and Majesco re-releases. Also, I've heard that the quality of the inside of Majesco re-release boxes is a bit more, I think, grainier, and it isn't as high quality as the original first printings of some of these games. Personally, I actually I haven't noticed the difference personally, but I also have to mention that I had to think for a second because frankly, I was young at the time, so all of those boxes sadly were thrown away. I'm trying to look for new boxes for, Mega Man X, stuff like that. I recently bought a Porky Pig's Haunted Holiday box. I'm pretty sure that was a game that also got a Majesco re-release as well. And it's funny because I had it definitely is actually, because I just bought a manual for that online, which was black and white, or grayscale, whatever you want to refer to it as. And it's kind of funny because I know I have that manual in black and white in my house, but I just can't find it. So I had to shell out that money online, which really frustrated me because I just bought a box for it really cheap recently. So I thought I had a full, what I consider a complete in box, not an actual online complete in box, but personally I'm fine if I don't have all the, fix-ins, all that other stuff that came with it. Originally, posters will get me, but still I thought I had everything set in my house, and then I realized I didn't have the manual. And that's how I actually ended up finding out that I had manuals for all these other games as well, that I mentioned earlier. So those are the few things that you can tell right off the bat. Even if you're not purchasing, does it say assembled instead of made? Is the manual in black and white / grayscale? And do you see a difference in a quote unquote difference in quality or even in color in the cartridge itself or on top of the cartridge itself? And then if someone opened it up for you graciously, let's say you're at a convention, you go, hey, can you open this thing up for me, just to test, see the legitimacy of it. I speak words for a living, guys. The legitimacy of it. And then they open it up, and then you see Majesco on there, and then okay, this is a Majesco re-release. Now, do the games play any differently? Well, from what I've noticed myself playing the games over the years, I have not noticed any slowdown that wouldn't have been there originally due to SNES limitations at the time. So personally, I haven't noticed anything wrong, quote unquote, with Majesco re-release games themselves. The way they were, put on, the way the chips were made, the way the games were, the ROMs were put on the boards. I've not noticed anything problematic with the gameplay itself, playing it when I was a kid. And I've played it fairly recently too, and I haven't noticed anything different compared to playing other cartridges that were first printings. Now, if you guys have noticed any differences, please comment below. But personally, I have not noticed any one difference with the actual gameplay and something running slower, something being unplayable, even something, as far as I know, I don't think anything was even changed in terms of if there are any issues. I remember there was a glitch or some kind of issue with In Mega Man X, I'm pretty sure there's an issue with text, and I think it was with Doctor. I think it was Dr. Light talking to X when he first gives him the leg power up, which isn't a spoiler. It's actually not a hidden thing in one of the levels. And so when that happens, you actually have, I think the text is over where it's under where it should be over, or there's something off with the text from what I remember. And I'm pretty sure it was in the Majesco re-release as well as the first printing. So I don't think they literally changed it. They only did it to try to release them as budget titles, which is probably why I actually got most of these games, because I have a strange feeling my family, my dad or my mom, went around thinking, oh, these games are $30 instead of $60 to $80. I wonder where we're gonna, which games we're gonna buy them. So I have a feeling that's why I have most of my collection, actually, because I'm pretty sure they wouldn't have bought $80 games. And frankly, looking at some of the games that I do have, maybe the most they ever spent was probably getting me Super Mario RPG, which I have an odd feeling that was a decent amount of money at the time. All the other games that I have in my collection, though, at least the ones that aren't, first party Nintendo titles, which I have a few, sure, but funnily enough, like looking at something like Donkey Kong Country, that came with my Super Nintendo, so they didn't have to shell out all that money to get that one. So it's kind of funny looking at some of these re-releases that I have in my collection, and I now realize why I had not a huge library, but a decent handful of games for the Super Nintendo. It's because they were that cheap. But speaking of cheap, right, should this affect your collection, right? Should this affect your collecting? Should you feel as if you're being gypped if you're buying a Majesco re-release? Does that really affect anything at all? Well, personally, I don't think it does. Now, I think it does if you're trying to go for a sealed collection and you're a high roller, right? And you're just sitting there and you're like, oh, I'm willing to spend any price. Well, then yes, I do think at that point it could definitely matter. It could matter if you're trying to buy some of these games for $100 or more, and some of them are second printings. I do understand. Like, I don't know if I would pay $100 for a Majesco re-release of a game, even one that's popular. But at the same time, I also feel odd about paying more than $100 for any game at this point. And I know how that sounds to some of you. It sounds quite, laughable with the way some retro game prices are going up. But I personally think that there's so many different retro games out there that I don't need to go for ones that are over $100 in certain respects, but even if they're that good, I'm not saying that they're not good and they're over $100. Even if they are that good, and many are, I personally don't feel the need to go there. So when I look at some of these re-releases, frankly, if I'm not paying top dollar anyway, I don't mind if I'm getting a mix and match, because you know what? My whole thing is, does the game work? Because I want to play the game, so does it work, right? If I want to bust out the game for some reason, right? So, windy night, no way for me to try to connect it to my computer with something like a Retroad or something like that. And no way for me to play this game, if I made a digital backup or something. No way for me to get it on my computer, or just something's off, right? Something's wrong. And, I say stormy because the idea that, even though where I am right now in New York, Wi-Fi is good, despite the fact that there can be some bad weather here and there. There are some places, I have family out in PA, that if it's a windy, stormy night, well, I guess PS4, Xbox One, I guess all of that's just obsolete. So, with all those online functionality and stuff like that. So, when looking at something like wanting to bust out the Super Nintendo, my question is, does the game work? And frankly, as far as I can tell, these Majesco re-releases, the games do work. The boards aren't cheaper and aren't more prone to wear and tear. That's what I've noticed for having them for 20 years. And frankly, out of some of my other games that I have around, my Majesco re-release of Mega Man X working, in my opinion, a bit better than some of my other games that I have, where I have to sit back and constantly feel like I'm cleaning Donkey Kong Country or some of my other games that are first-party Nintendo games versus, and maybe I just wore those out more, but I could swear that I wore out my copy of Mega Man X worked really hard because I was playing a lot of Mega Man X as a kid. So I feel like some of these Majesco re-releases, not to say that they're better, because I think that is a little blaspheme, but at the same time, immediately immediately a bunch of people on the internet, a bunch of nerds are like, J'accuse! I'm like, all right, guys, it's fine. Sorry. But I'm not saying it's better, but I don't think personally that I've noticed any of them corrode faster or just explode in any way faster than some of the first party, not even first party games, but just in general, these first editions, right, of the games released by Capcom or whoever else. So Acclaim as well, I think EA may have also done, went with some Majesco re-releases. I know Acclaim did, not sure about EA, but personally, that's just my take on these games, on these re-releases. I think that it does not have any bearing on the quality whatsoever. If you're spending a certain amount, if you know what you're spending, and if you just want a game to work, I personally think that it's not a problem at all, right? I would understand if you're worried about, if you don't have a box protector or something like that, but, if you're getting box protectors and things like that, and you're not constantly moving around your games, yes, you're putting more stuff into your collection, sure, moving stuff off shelves, yes, but I personally don't feel as if there's a big deal between a Majesco re-release and a first printing. I know some of you might, and that's cool if you do, and now that you know, at least you know what to look out for, right? But personally, as long as everything is functioning properly, and as long as the box is in decent condition, then frankly, and of course the manual doesn't have any lasagna marks or something like that, where you're just like, or Cheetos, where you're like, oh no, I don't want to touch this, and now I have to because I have to pull it out every time I pull out the game, right? So as long as that isn't there, then frankly, it is what it is. It's a re-release of a game that, although it's funny, because it was a budget title, I would pay more than 30 for it, sure, because things have changed, but I don't know if I would pay 100, even if I would pay over 100, I don't know if I'd pay 150 for a Majesco re-release. And again, that's all up to you, right? You define what your collection means to you. So you think that this is worthless? Well, then try to sell it on the internet, and I can assure you that someone out there will pay you a good amount of money if it's a working copy of Mega Man X. I'm not telling you how much because prices fluctuate, and for all we know, tomorrow someone will flood the market with a bunch of, sealed copies of Mega Man X. So I'm not going to, try to speculate on anything or talk about what it is right now, but I say good money in the sense that people like Mega Man X. I like Mega Man X. That's the reason why I still have it in my collection. That's the reason why I played it so much as a kid. I enjoy that game. So I don't think there are going to be that many people out there that are going to say, ooh, Majesco, no thank you. If it looks good, if it plays well, if you show, in a listing that it plays well, yeah, someone will buy it, right? So, but if you don't want it personally, that's cool. You do you. But either way, I want to thank you all so much for listening to another episode of Matt Rants. Before you go, you're about to click out. Don't click out just yet. Before you go, I want to mention not just the general thank yous that I always give, that I'll also be giving you guys at the end of the video, but I want to mention that if you guys want to see what the inside of some of these Majesco cartridges might look like, I've actually opened up some before on a series that we do on this channel called What's in a Cart. It's generally a series where we're trying to figure out whether or not a cart is legitimate or not, because sometimes, as you guys know, as retro game collectors, trying to get stuff online or at flea markets, it can be a bit of a hassle sometimes. Even though you think that a game is completely legit, that you're totally fine, no problems whatsoever, sometimes you buy a game and it's not as legit as you'd like. So I have opened up some cartridges on What's in a Cart before, and just this, I've opened up Mega Man X actually on What's in a Cart before, and later on this week I will also be opening up Super Empire Strikes Back, and we'll see whether or not that one is a Majesco re-release. I'm thinking that it is, because funnily enough, I have a manual for it, and the manual is a black and white, so you'd think, oh, it's a Majesco re-release. But what if it's not? We'll find out. And the reason why I say that too is because I actually ended up with 2 manuals for Pokemon Ruby. And I could swear to you guys, I have no fucking idea how I did. So I'm sitting back like, maybe it's the real version. I had a real manual. But now for some reason I lost that one and I have a Majesco manual. I don't know. The world is weird and topsy-turvy. But either way, thank you all so much for watching / listening to another episode of Matt Rants. Please remember to like and subscribe if you liked the video. And if you didn't like the video, you don't have to like and subscribe, but you also could anyway. And you can hate watch all of our stuff. It's great. Comment below with some of your Majesco re-release stories. Tell me. I would love to hear about you guys talking about how you got games as a kid and you were like, oh yeah, this is that's so cool. And now as you're growing up, you're like, my life was a lie. They just bought me the games that were cheapest. But yeah, so again, love you guys. Thank you all so much. Take care. Hope you had fun. And tune in next time for another episode of Matt Rants. And we'll actually be doing another one pretty soon this week because, as you can tell, Matt Rants is usually a Monday release and it's a Tuesday release. So we'll be doubling some stuff up here and there. You'll be getting, on some days, you're getting twice the amount of releases. So you actually can expect a release of something else a little bit later on today. All right, guys. Thank you all so much. Love you guys. Take care and see ya.